let's talk about Galileo, okay? Let's talk about Galileo. How many of you have ever heard of Galileo? Have you heard of Galileo? Yes or no? Yeah, you probably have heard of Galileo. Galileo is one of the ones just normal people have heard of before. He's so famous that we just say one name, and Galileo, that's his first name, right? That's his first name right there, okay? He's so famous that you say his first name and people are like, oh yeah, it's this guy. Is this that Galileo? I know which one. I know which Galileo you're talking about. And you guys know what Galileo's last name is? Anybody know what Galileo's last name is? To me, it's kind of funny. So, Galileo's last name is Galilei. If you take his first name and change the last letter to an I, that's his name. Galileo Galilei. So, to me, the reason I find that funny is, to me, that means his parents were like really lazy when they were naming. I don't know anything about like Italian naming conventions at the time. I'm probably talking, out the side of my neck here, but Galileo Galilei, to me, that's like if your parents were Mr. and Mrs. Smith and they were like, oh no, we had a baby. Oh no, we had a baby. We got to name him now. Smitto Smith. His name is Smitto Smith. That's what it's in my head. That's what his parents did when they named him. They were like, don't worry, he won't be famous. It's fine. Just nobody will notice. And then, he got famous, right? So Galileo, goofy name. We're just gonna say Galileo. I hope that one day people can just say my first name and they know in like 100 years from now, they like, oh yeah, I know which one you're talking about. It was that guy, right? That's Galileo. Okay. Now, does anybody know what Galileo is famous for inventing? What's Galileo famous for inventing? Here's a hint. Telescopes. Yes. Up until this point, all throughout history, all of astronomy was just done with the naked eye. And so there was a big limit to how good our measurements could be and how good our data could be. But with the invention of the telescope here, Galileo was able to see things that no one had ever seen before, okay? Now, there is a little bit of a contention there. He might not have technically invented the telescope, even though he gets credit for it. It turns out he lived down the street from a watchmaker and or like a clockmaker, and if you're a clockmaker, you have to work with tiny little pieces all the time, and it would be nice if you could see them up a lot bigger. And this watchmaker down the street had lined up a few lenses in a row, like kind of like in a line, and he used that, and he basically had a tube with two lenses in it, and if he looked through it, he could see his watch pieces much, much larger, okay? And that guy lived down the street from Galileo, so there's some speculation that Galileo might have ended up seeing this neighbor down the street and essentially like, oh, what are you doing with that? And he just like, whoop, telescope. We don't know if that happened, but it seems a little suspicious that a guy down the street from him had invented almost the same thing for looking down, and Galileo could just tilt it up and be like, oh, telescope, I invented a new thing by picking your thing up and pushing it up. That might have happened, right? That said, the watchmaker didn't know what he was onto, so technically it's sort of a new invention, even if that happened, because he's got a whole new use for it, but yeah. Oh, and somebody mentioned, Galileo, if you just invented the telescope, what are you going to look at it with it? Everything, right? You're going to look at pretty much everything in the sky. He looked at the moon, he looked at the planets, he looked at the stars, and unfortunately, one thing he looked at as he probably looked a little too close to the sun. And it's speculated that possibly may have been what made him go blind. Just looking, like, he probably wouldn't have looked right at the sun. If you look right at the sun with a telescope, it will literally burn a hole in your eye. So don't do that. Fun fact, public safety announcement, don't look at the sun. You could go blind like Galileo. Okay, now, so it was Galileo with his telescope that finally found proof that the planets went around the sun. Okay, so let's talk about that real quick. How did he prove it? Well, he saw a lot of things that helped him believe that the sun was at the center of the solar system. And I'm going to talk about them in increasing importance, okay? Because he looked at the stars. If you look at the stars through a telescope like Galileo's, they look exactly the same. Because stars are so far away that even if you magnify them, they don't look any different. So he wasn't super excited about that. That didn't really help him prove that everything was orbiting around the sun. But one thing he looked at was the moon, okay? He looked at the moon. And up until this point, we knew there were splotches on the moon, but we didn't know what they were. When he looked at the moon through a telescope, what did he see? What did he see in that telescope? What did he see on the moon? Craters, yes. He saw craters, he saw mountains, he saw valleys. And don't overthink this. Where is another place that has mountains and craters and valleys and things like that? What's another place that has those same kind of features other than the moon? Earth, exactly. So up until this point, we weren't exactly sure what the moon was, but Galileo with his telescope saw that the moon was just another place like Earth. That doesn't prove anything about planets going around the sun, but the whole idea that everything orbits around the Earth kind of comes from everybody thinking the Earth was super unique, that everything else out there was weird other little dots, and everything orbits the Earth because the Earth's unique. What he saw on the moon showed him that the moon was a lot like Earth, so Earth wasn't so special, right? Now, the next thing he looked at that was kind of in that same wheelbox is he looked at the planets and saw through his telescope that they also looked a lot like Earth. So the moon and the planets, he was the one to discover that the planets were not stars, okay? He was the one to discover that the planets were things like Earth, not like those little dots that were further out, okay? And again, that meant that Earth was not unique. It was just one of many things that were all very similar, okay? So why would everything orbit around the Earth if there was a bunch of other things right there that are basically the same kind of thing? Okay, that's important. The next thing he looked at was Jupiter, okay? The next thing he looked at was Jupiter. And through his telescope, he saw something next to Jupiter that no one had ever seen. And that was 4 little dots. When he zoomed in on Jupiter, he saw Jupiter kind of big in his view, and he saw 4 little dots. And he watched those 4 little dots for week after week after week. And every week, he drew another picture of where the dots were. This is Galileo's actual notes here, I believe from week to week to week to week. I assume he could read this handwriting. I can't read anything up here, other than I'm pretty sure this is the word Jupiter right here, but I'm not really even sure. But in each of these pictures, that's Jupiter, and that's the little dots right next to Jupiter. And as you can see here, these dots, sometimes they're on one side of Jupiter, sometimes they're on the other side of Jupiter. They go back and forth next to Jupiter. So check it out. Can anybody figure out what those little dots are? What are those little dots he saw swinging back and forth next to Jupiter? What are these dots? Yeah, those are moons. He was the first one to discover that other planets have moons, okay? These dots next to Jupiter proved that not everything was orbiting around the Earth, because you can watch these things orbit Jupiter, right? Now again, that doesn't prove anything is orbiting around the sun, but it does prove that Earth wasn't the only thing that stuff was orbiting around, which again weakens the idea that we're the center of everything. So, again, looking at the moon and the planets showed that Earth wasn't unique physically, and looking at Jupiter in discovering moons showed that Earth wasn't unique in having things orbiting it, okay? But the most important thing he saw, the final thing he saw that really got him excited, was what he saw when he looked at Venus, okay? And we're almost done for the day. We got one more thing to talk about after this. What did he see when he looked at Venus? Check this out. This is my final drawing of the day. Oh, did it reboot? There we go. Okay. When he looked at Venus, with the naked eye, Venus looks like a dot all the time. But sometimes Venus would look like a dot, like a circle. But sometimes when he looked at Venus, it was bigger and it was a perfect half circle. Oh, it froze on me. Let me restart it. Sometimes when he looked at Venus, it was bigger and a perfect half circle. And sometimes it would be that same size, but it would be the other half of the circle. And sometimes it would be just like a sliver of a circle, but it would be way bigger. So these are all the shapes that Venus can have if you look at it through a telescope. Tiny in a circle, a little bit bigger in a half circle, and really big in just a little sliver of a circle, okay? And what this is, what's another thing that has shapes like this? What's another thing that makes these same kind of shapes? What's another thing? What else makes these shapes? Like a physical thing you could go look at. The moon, right? It's the moon. But there's a difference. So the moon has phases like this. Venus has phases, okay? And the difference is the moon doesn't change size when it changes shape, okay? So Venus's phases change size. This right here is proof that Venus orbits the sun, okay? This right here is proof that Venus orbits the sun. How is it proof? Check this out. In the old system, everybody orbited the Earth, okay? Everybody orbited the Earth. But if everybody's orbiting the Earth, then that means if Earth is here and the sun is here, here's Venus going around its goofy little epicycle, that glass ball on the glass ball. Would Venus ever light up fully from our point of view? If we're looking at it from back here, we're always going to see the shady side of Venus. We would never see Venus go full. In order for Venus to go full, where would it need to go? Where would Venus need to go for us to see Venus light up? Where would Venus have to go? Yeah, if it stayed over here, it would always look dark. Yeah, Venus would have to go back here for the sun to light it up for us to see it down there, right? So in order to get the shapes that I was talking about, Venus has to go around the sun. So if Venus was right here, when it's close to us, it would only have a sliver lit up, right? And when it's really far away on the other side of the sun, it would look fully lit up. So it would be a circle. But what would the size be like if it's all the way on the other side of the sun? It would be small, right? So that means the only ways that Venus can always have the same size and shape that Galileo saw, it would have to go around the sun. So that means with that telescope, you've proven that Venus goes around the sun because you literally can watch it go around the sun. So out of everything that Galileo saw, this was absolute proof that the planets go around the sun, okay? So Galileo proved it. And anybody could look through his telescope and see the proof. Anybody could watch the planets go around the sun. So Galileo got excited. He's like, oh man, I have absolute proof that anybody can look at and see. And they would have to believe that everything goes around the sun. Did it work out that way? Is that how things worked out? When Galileo told everybody, hey, look, you can watch the planets go around the sun if you look through my little tube. Did everybody believe this? Is that how that went down? No. It absolutely did not go down like that. Does anybody know what happened to Galileo when he told everybody about his discovery, about his proof? He was arrested. He was arrested. He was placed under arrest for the rest of his entire life, okay? His entire life, he was never freed again. So even though Galileo finally had the proof that everything orbited the sun, nobody believed. He was like, you could just look through the tube and look at it. And they're like, but I don't have to look through the tube, do I? You can't make me look through the tube. And he's like, but you just look and you can see it. And they're like, you know what? I'm not even going to look at it. Ha ha ha. We defeated you, Galileo. And so he was placed under arrest. They actually punished his family for being related to him. They punished his family for being related to him. They hated him so much that they wanted to make sure they wiped out his bloodline. So his daughter, for example, was actually required to be a nun for the rest of her life. They sent her into the mountains so that she would not find anybody to have a family with. They wanted to make sure she didn't have kids. So Galileo's bloodline was cut off because they prevented his kids from having kids. Okay? That's how much they hated this idea, which is crazy to me. And a little while after he died, slowly over the next couple of decades, more and more people started looking through the telescope and being like, oh wait. I see it. I see. Oh yeah, you're right. You see it. You could just look through this and you could see. You could just watch the planets go around the sun. Oops. Sorry, Galileo. Sorry we did that to you. You were right. But they couldn't because he was dead then. He was dead before, thinking that nobody would ever believe him. And in fact, it was the people who put him under arrest was the Catholic Church. They did eventually apologize to him after he was dead. Does anybody know when the Catholic Church apologized to Galileo? Guess. It was the 1990s. Galileo was forgiven by Galileo wasn't forgiven, but they apologized to Galileo in the 1990s. Okay, I didn't mean that the church didn't believe him until the 1990s. They just didn't officially apologize him until the 1990s. Everybody believed that we were orbiting around the sun a long time ago. And I don't want to single out the Catholic Church. basically everyone, Protestants, non-Christians, nobody believed him at the time. But eventually, I just thought that was a weird fact there. Okay.